I found the commitment papers in my daughter's purse while she was cutting my 70th birthday cake. Cedar Pines. Psychiatric facility. Patient name, Harold Pemberton. Reason for admission, severe cognitive decline, potential danger to self and others. The signature line for next of kin authorization was blank, waiting for someone to sign away my freedom. I slipped the papers back into her bag and smiled as she handed me a slice of cake. "Make a wish, Dad," she said. I did. I wished I had never trusted any of them. I'm glad you're here with me now. If you've ever felt like the people closest to you were getting ready to manage you instead of respect you, subscribe. This channel is for folks who refuse to be written off. My name is Harold Pemberton. I'm 70 years old, though according to the state of California, I've been dead for 2 months. I didn't know that at the time of my birthday party. I wouldn't discover that particular betrayal until later. But standing there with frosting on my lips and commitment papers burning in my mind, I already knew something was terribly wrong. Let me take you back to the beginning, to who I was before I became a dead man walking. I grew up in a 2-room apartment in the Bronx. My father, Thomas Pemberton, drove a delivery truck for a bread company. He left every morning at 4 o'clock and came home after dark, smelling of flour and exhaust. My mother, Rose, took in laundry from the wealthy families on the Upper East Side. I remember her hands always red and chapped from the hot water and harsh soap. She never complained, not once. She just did what needed to be done. We had nothing but dreams and determination. I was the youngest of 4 boys. Thomas Jr. went to work in the factories when he was 16. Michael joined the Army and never came back from Vietnam. Patrick became a cop in Brooklyn and retired with a bad back and a good pension. And me, little Harold, I was the one who finished high school. The first Pemberton to hold a diploma in 3 generations. My father cried the day I graduated. He stood in the back of the auditorium in his only good suit, the one he wore to church and funerals, and he wept like a child. "My boy," he said, hugging me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. "My boy did it." He died 2 years later. Heart attack on the job. Collapsed right there in the bakery parking lot. He was 52 years old. Never got to see what I would become. Never got to see the buildings I would build, the empire I would create. Sometimes I wonder what he would think of me now. Would he be proud? Would he be disappointed that all my success meant nothing in the end? I met my wife Margaret when I was 24 years old. She was working as a secretary at the architectural firm where I had just been hired as a junior draftsman. I noticed her on my first day. She had red hair that caught the light like fire and a laugh that made everyone in the room smile. She wore a green dress that matched her eyes, and when she looked at me, I forgot how to speak. I asked her to dinner 3 times before she said yes. The first time, she said she was busy. The second time, she said she was washing her hair. The third time, she looked at me for a long moment and said, "You're persistent, aren't you?" "When I see something I want," I told her, "I don't give up." She smiled. "Fine. Friday night. Pick me up at 7. And don't be late." I wasn't late. I was 15 minutes early. I brought flowers, roses, because I didn't know what kind she liked. She opened the door and saw the bouquet and laughed. "Roses? You're trying too hard, Harold Pemberton." "Maybe," I said, "but I figure if I'm going to fail, I might as well fail big." She laughed again, and in that moment, I fell in love with her. Completely and irrevocably in love. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at City Hall. Her parents didn't approve. Her father, a mid-level executive at a manufacturing company, thought she was marrying beneath her station. "The son of a truck driver and a laundress," he said. "Is that really what you want for your life?" Margaret told him to mind his own business. That was the first time I saw the steel in her, the backbone that would carry us through decades of challenges and triumphs. We proved her father wrong. I had a gift for seeing what buildings could become, not just what they were. I would walk through a rundown neighborhood and see luxury condominiums. I would look at an empty lot and see a shopping center. I could visualize things that didn't exist yet, and more importantly, I could make other people see them too. Within 5 years, I had worked my way up from junior draftsman to project manager. Within 10 years, I had started my own development company with a loan I was terrified I wouldn't be able to repay. Within 20 years, I was one of the most successful real estate developers on the West Coast. We built shopping centers in San Jose, office towers in downtown Los Angeles, luxury condominiums overlooking the Pacific. The Pemberton name became synonymous with quality and innovation. When a Pemberton building went up, people knew it would be built right. The money came. First a trickle, then a stream, then a flood. We moved from our tiny apartment to a house in the valley, then to a bigger house in Beverly Hills, then to an estate in Bel Air, complete with a pool and a tennis court and a staff of 6. Margaret handled it all with grace. She never forgot where we came from. She never let the money change who she was at her core. She still did her own grocery shopping. She still sent Christmas cards to her old college roommates. She still called her mother every Sunday, even though her mother never really approved of me. We had 2 children. Victoria came first, a beautiful girl with her mother's red hair and my stubborn determination. She was a difficult baby, colicky and demanding, but she grew into a fierce, intelligent young woman. She had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. When she was 12, she informed me that my newest development project was environmentally irresponsible and presented a 10-page research paper to prove it. I was furious at the time. Now I realize she was right. Then came Richard, 2 years later. Where Victoria was fire, Richard was ice. He was calm, charming, always knew exactly what to say to make you feel like the most important person in the room. He could talk his way into or out of anything. Teachers loved him. Girls adored him. Even I, his own father, sometimes felt like I was being handled rather than spoken to. We gave them everything. Private schools with tuition that cost more than my father earned in a year, summer camps in Europe where they learned to ski in the Alps and sail on the Mediterranean, the best universities money could buy. Victoria studied law at Stanford. Richard got his MBA from Wharton. I brought them both into the business after they graduated. Victoria handled our legal affairs, reviewing contracts, managing our relationships with outside counsel. She was good at it, precise and thorough. Richard managed our investment portfolio, making decisions about where to put our money to maximize returns. He was good at that too, maybe too good. I thought I was building a dynasty, a family legacy that would last for generations. The Pemberton Empire, stretching from Los Angeles to Seattle, from commercial real estate to residential development to hospitality ventures. I imagined my grandchildren and great-grandchildren carrying on the work I had started, building on the foundation I had laid. I was building my own prison. Margaret passed away 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. It took her in 4 months, from diagnosis to funeral. I remember the day we got the news. We were sitting in the doctor's office, holding hands, waiting for test results. When he told us, Margaret squeezed my hand so hard it hurt. "How long?" she asked. Her voice was steady. "Controlled. 6 months to a year," the doctor said. "With treatment. Without treatment, perhaps 3 to 4 months. She chose treatment. Not for herself, but for me. "I'm not ready to leave you yet," she said. "Not until I'm sure you'll be okay." She fought hard. Chemotherapy that left her weak and nauseous. radiation that burned her from the inside out, experimental treatments that cost a fortune and did nothing. Through it all, she never complained. She never raged against the unfairness of it. She just kept going, one day at a time, until she couldn't anymore. I held her hand until the very end. I was there when she took her last breath, when the light went out of those beautiful green eyes. She looked at me in those final moments and said, "Take care of yourself, Harold. Don't let the children take advantage of your grief." At the time, I thought she was just being paranoid. The drugs, I told myself. The pain. She doesn't know what she's saying. I should have listened more carefully. After Margaret died, I threw myself into work. It was the only way I knew how to cope with the grief. If I was in a meeting, I didn't have to think about how empty the house felt. If I was reviewing contracts, I didn't have to remember the sound of her laugh. If I was solving problems, I didn't have to face the problem I couldn't solve, how to live without her. But I started noticing things. Small things at first. Richard would schedule meetings that I wasn't invited to. I would see it on the company calendar, strategic planning session, or portfolio review, and when I asked about it, he would say, "Oh, that's just internal stuff, Dad. Nothing you need to worry about." Victoria would have long phone conversations that ended abruptly when I walked into the room. She would be laughing or talking intensely, and the moment she saw me, her face would go blank. "Just a friend," she would say. "Nothing important." Documents would appear on my desk that required my signature. Complicated financial instruments, restructuring agreements, powers of attorney, documents. I barely had time to read before Richard would whisk them away. "Just routine stuff, Dad," he would say. "Legal formalities. You know how it is." I trusted them. They were my children. They had grown up in my house, eaten at my table, learned at my knee. Why would they betray me? 6 months before my birthday, I had a minor heart episode. I was in a meeting with some Japanese investors when my chest tightened and my left arm went numb. I thought I was dying. I thought about Margaret waiting for me on the other side. But it wasn't my time. Not yet. The doctors called it a warning, a wake-up call. They told me to slow down, to delegate more responsibility, to enjoy my retirement while I still could. I took their advice. I stepped back from the day-to-day operations. I let Richard handle more of the investments. I let Victoria manage more of the legal affairs. I trusted them with the empire I had spent 40 years building. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was not paying attention to my mail. I had always let my assistant, a woman named Brenda, who had been with me for 15 years, handle routine correspondence. Bills, bank statements, legal notices, all went through her before reaching my desk. What I didn't know was that Brenda had been replaced 3 months earlier. Victoria had hired a new girl, a young woman named Crystal, who smiled too much and asked too few questions. The mail that reached me was carefully curated. Birthday cards from old friends, invitations to charity galas, magazines and catalogs. The mail that didn't reach me was far more interesting. Bank statements showing accounts I didn't know existed. Legal notices about property transfers I hadn't authorized. Letters from the IRS questioning transactions I had never made. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about my birthday party, the night everything changed. Victoria had insisted on hosting it at her house in Bel Air. A small gathering, she said, just family and a few close friends. I didn't want a party. I didn't want to celebrate turning 70 without Margaret by my side. But Victoria was insistent. "You can't hide in that house forever, Dad," she said. "Mom would want you to live, to celebrate, to be with your family." So I agreed. I put on the blue suit Margaret had picked out for me years ago, the one she said brought out my eyes. I drove to Victoria's house, a sprawling Mediterranean villa she had bought with money I had given her. I parked in the circular driveway and looked at the house, the perfectly manicured lawn, the imported Italian fountain, and I felt a strange sense of foreboding. My grandchildren ran up to hug me. Richard clapped me on the back. Victoria kissed my cheek. "You look wonderful, Dad," she said. I felt wonderful. For the first time since Margaret died, I felt like maybe things were going to be okay. My family was here. My grandchildren were laughing. Life would go on. Then I went to find a bathroom. Victoria's house is enormous. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a home theater, a wine cellar, a gym that she never uses. I got turned around in the hallway and ended up in her private study instead of the guest bathroom. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the security lights outside the window. Her purse was on the desk, a Hermes bag that cost more than my first car. I wasn't snooping. I swear I wasn't. I was just looking for a light switch. My hand brushed against the bag and something fell out. White papers with a blue letterhead. I picked them up without thinking. Cedar Pines. Cedar Pines. Psychiatric Facility. Involuntary Commitment Authorization. My blood turned to ice as I read. Patient name, Harold Pemberton. Date of birth, March 15, 1955. Primary diagnosis, severe cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia. Secondary diagnosis, paranoid ideation, possible delusional disorder. Reason for admission, patient has demonstrated significant memory loss, confusion, and episodes of aggression. Patient has shown an inability to manage personal and financial affairs. Patient represents a potential danger to self and others. Recommended treatment. Inpatient psychiatric care with ongoing evaluation. There was more. Pages and pages of medical evaluations from doctors I had never seen. Statements from nurses who had supposedly observed me during home visits that never happened. A detailed account of my supposed decline into madness, complete with specific incidents and dates. March 3rd. Patient was unable to recall his own address. Required assistance from daughter Victoria. March 15th. Patient became aggressive with household staff over minor issue with dinner preparation. Staff member reported feeling threatened. April 1st. Patient was found wandering in the garden at 3 a.m., disoriented and confused. Required assistance to return to the house. It was all fiction. Every single word of it. I am not confused. I am not aggressive. I do not have dementia. I am a 70-year-old man with a sharp mind and a good memory. I still read 3 newspapers every morning. I still do the crossword puzzle in ink. I still remember every deal I've ever closed, every building I've ever built, every face of every person who ever worked for me. But according to these papers, I was a danger to myself and others. I needed to be locked away for my own protection. I heard footsteps in the hallway, high heels clicking on marble. I shoved the papers back into Victoria's purse and slipped out of the study through the service entrance. I found the bathroom. I splashed water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My children were trying to have me committed. I went back to the party. I smiled. I opened presents. I posed for photographs with my grandchildren. I blew out the candles on my cake, all 70 of them flickering in the dim light. I made a wish, and all the while I watched them. Victoria, laughing with her husband Daniel, a Spanish investment banker she had met at a conference in Barcelona. Richard, refilling champagne glasses, his arm around his wife Catherine, a former model who spent more on shoes than most people earned in a month. My grandchildren, playing in the garden, innocent of the schemes their parents were hatching. They all knew. They had to know. This wasn't something Victoria could do alone. This was a conspiracy. But why? What could they possibly gain from locking their father in a psychiatric facility? The answer, as it always is, was money. I got my answer 3 days later. I had hired a private investigator. A man named Frank Delgado, recommended by an old friend who owed me a favor. Frank had been a cop for 20 years before going private. He had a face like weathered leather and eyes that had seen everything. I told him everything. The commitment papers, the secret meetings, the feeling that my children were hiding something. "I'll look into it, Mr. Pemberton," Frank said. He was sitting in my study, drinking the coffee I had poured him. "But I have to warn you. What I find might be worse than what you're imagining." He was right. Frank called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice was strange, careful, like he was delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Mr. Pemberton, I need to meet with you in person. This isn't something I can discuss over the phone." We met at a coffee shop in Santa Monica, a little place on the pier where tourists never went. It was the kind of place where the coffee was strong and the waitresses called you "hone" and nobody asked questions. Frank was already there when I arrived. He had a manila folder in front of him, thick with documents. He didn't touch his coffee. "Before I show you this," he said, "I need you to prepare yourself. What I'm about to tell you is going to be difficult to hear. I've buried my wife. I've found commitment papers with my name on them. I don't think there's much left that can shock me." "Don't be so sure about that." Frank waited until she was gone before he opened the folder. "I've been doing this job for 20 years, Mr. Pemberton. I've seen a lot of ugly things. Infidelity, corporate espionage, insurance fraud. But what your children have done, what they're planning to do, it's one of the worst cases of elder abuse I've ever investigated." He opened the folder. The first document was a death certificate, my death certificate, Harold James Pemberton. Date of birth, March 15, 1955. Date of death, October 15, 2025. Cause of death, cardiac arrest secondary to chronic heart disease. I stared at the document. My name, my date of birth, my social security number. Everything was correct except for one minor detail. I was very much alive. "According to the state of California," Frank said, "you died 2 months ago. How is this possible?" "Your children filed the death certificate. They had a doctor sign off on it, a Dr. Marcus Webb." Frank pulled out another document. I looked into him. He lost his medical license 3 years ago for falsifying patient records. He's been working under the table ever since, signing documents for people who need someone dead on paper. I felt the room spinning. Why would they need me dead on paper? Frank pulled out more documents, property transfers, bank statements, corporate filings, stock certificates, the paper trail of a systematic looting. "Since your death, your children have been busy. They've transferred ownership of 7 properties worth a combined $45 million into their names. They've liquidated 3 of your investment accounts, approximately $12 million. They've restructured the holding company to remove you as majority shareholder and install Richard as CEO. They've sold off 2 of your subsidiary companies to foreign buyers for a total of $28 million. I did the math in my head. $85 million. They had stolen $85 million in 2 months. They can't do that. I'm still alive. Legally, you're not. And here's where it gets complicated. Frank pulled out another document. This is a power of attorney dated 6 months ago. It gives Victoria and Richard full control over all your assets in the event of your incapacitation or death. Your signature is on it. I looked at the signature. It was mine. Or rather, it was a very good forgery of mine. The loops of the H, the flourish on the P, even the way I always signed on a slight upward angle. Whoever had done this knew my signature intimately. I never signed this. I know. I had a handwriting expert look at it. She said the signature was traced from another document. Probably something you signed years ago, maybe a Christmas card or a routine business letter. I sat back in my chair. The coffee shop seemed very far away. My children had declared me dead. They had forged my signature on legal documents. They had stolen tens of millions of dollars. And now they were planning to lock me in a psychiatric facility so I could never tell anyone the truth. If you believe nobody should lose their life's work to family greed, hit like and subscribe, because the next part is where I take my life back. There's one more thing, Frank said. His voice was even more careful now, like he was handling something fragile. I found something else during my investigation. Something about your wife. Margaret? What about Margaret? Not Margaret, Mr. Pemberton. I'm talking about your current wife, Elena. I stared at him. I don't have a current wife. Margaret died 3 years ago. I've been alone ever since. Frank's face went pale. Mr. Pemberton, according to public records, you married a woman named Elena Vasquez 14 months ago. The marriage certificate is on file with the county clerk's office. Your signature is on it. Another forgery. Another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. Who is Elena Vasquez? That's what I'm trying to figure out. So far, I've traced her to an address in Las Vegas. She's 34 years old, originally from Colombia. No prior criminal record, but she's connected to a network of people who specialize in elder fraud, marriage scams, estate theft, that kind of thing. Elder fraud. My children had turned me into a victim of elder fraud. Frank continued. Here's my theory, Mr. Pemberton. Your children needed a way to access your assets without raising suspicion. A death certificate alone wouldn't do it. Too many questions, too much scrutiny. So they found Elena through their connections. They created a fake marriage to establish her as your spouse. Then they filed a death certificate to kill you off. As your widow, Elena would have a legitimate claim to a portion of your estate. More importantly, she could sign off on any documents that required a spouse's approval. She could waive her right to contest the will. She could agree to whatever financial arrangements your children proposed. And the commitment papers? Insurance, a backup plan. If you ever found out what was happening and tried to stop them, they could have you declared mentally incompetent. Your testimony would be worthless. No court would listen to a confused old man with dementia. You'd spend the rest of your life in a facility while they continued to drain your accounts. I thought about Victoria's smile at my birthday party, Richard's hearty handshake, the grandchildren playing in the garden, innocent of the schemes being hatched around them. They planned this for months, I said, maybe years. It appears so, yes. It appears so, yes. The paper trail goes back at least 18 months. The forged power of attorney is dated 6 months ago, but some of the planning documents I found are older than that. I asked the question I had been dreading, the question that had kept me awake every night since I found those commitment papers. Is anyone else involved? Anyone else in my family? Frank was quiet for a long moment. He turned the coffee cup in his hands, round and round, not drinking. There's one more person, Mr. Pemberton, someone I need to tell you about, but this is going to be the hardest part. Just tell me. Margaret. Margaret. Argret is dead. Yes. But before she died, she was part of this. The words didn't make sense. They bounced around in my head like marbles in a jar, rattling and clattering but not settling into any recognizable pattern. That's impossible. Margaret would never. Some of the earliest documents I found are dated from when she was still healthy. Emails between Margaret and Victoria discussing the plan, notes in Margaret's handwriting about timing and logistics. Her signature appears on several of the preliminary agreements. The noise of the tourists and the seagulls faded to a distant hum. Margaret, my Margaret, the woman I had loved for 46 years, the woman who held my hand as she died, who looked at me with those beautiful green eyes and told me to take care of myself. She had been planning to betray me. "That can't be right," I whispered. "There has to be a mistake." "Someone forged her signature, too." Frank shook his head. I had the same expert look at Margaret's signatures. "They're authentic, all of them." "I'm sorry, Mr. Pemberton, the evidence is clear." Margaret was involved in the early stages of this scheme. Whether she had a change of heart before she died, I can't say. But she was part of it. I don't remember leaving the coffee shop. I don't remember driving home. I only remember sitting in my study, staring at the photograph of Margaret on my desk. She was smiling in the photo, her red hair blowing in the wind, her green eyes sparkling with joy. We had taken it on our 40th anniversary trip to Hawaii, standing on the beach at sunset. Had she already been planning my destruction at that moment? When she kissed me good night, when she told me she loved me, when she held my hand and watched the sun go down? Was she thinking about commitment papers and forged signatures and millions of dollars? I sat there until dark. I sat there until the stars came out. I sat there until the photograph blurred with my tears and I couldn't see her face anymore. Everything I believed was a lie. My wife had betrayed me. My children had betrayed me. I was legally dead, financially ruined, and one signature away from being locked in a psychiatric facility. But I was not broken. Not yet. The next morning, I got up before dawn. I showered. I shaved. I put on a clean suit and a fresh tie. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a man who had been knocked down but not defeated. A man who had fought his way up from nothing once and could do it again. I spent the next week planning. I contacted my oldest friend, a retired judge named William Hartley. We had known each other since law school, when I took a few night classes to understand the legal side of real estate. He had always been honest with me, even when the truth was painful. I told him everything. The death certificate, the forged documents, the commitment papers, Margaret's involvement. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. We were sitting in his study, surrounded by law books and family photographs. The afternoon sun came through the windows, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. "Do you believe me?" I asked. "Harold, I've known you for 40 years. You're one of the sharpest people I've ever met. If you say this happened, I believe you. What do I do?" William stood up and walked to his window. He looked out at his garden, at the roses his wife had planted before she died 5 years ago. "You fight, but you fight smart. You don't go in with guns blazing. You gather evidence. You build a case. You make sure that when you strike once and you strike hard. I want to see their faces, I said, when they realize it's over. I want to watch them understand what they've lost. William turned to look at me. That's not justice, Harold. That's revenge. Maybe, but maybe I'm entitled to a little revenge after what they did to me. He nodded slowly. Maybe you are, but be careful. Revenge has a way of consuming the person who seeks it. Don't let this destroy you the way they tried to destroy you. He helped me find lawyers I could trust, specialists in elder law and estate litigation. He helped me set up new bank accounts in my name at institutions where my children had no connections. He helped me document everything, every forged signature, every fraudulent transfer, every lie. The most important thing I learned was this: I was not legally dead. The death certificate was fraudulent. It could be overturned. My signature on the power of attorney was forged. That could be proven with expert testimony. The marriage to Elena Vasquez was void because I had never consented to it. Everything my children had done was built on a foundation of lies, and lies eventually crumble. But I didn't want to just undo what they had done. I wanted them to understand what they had done. I wanted to see their faces when they realized their carefully constructed scheme was falling apart. I wanted to watch them squirm. Some might call that revenge. I call it justice. So I planned a dinner party. I called Victoria on a Sunday afternoon. My voice was calm and warm, the voice of a doting father who suspected nothing. I'd like to have the family over for dinner next Saturday, I said. A proper family dinner like we used to have when your mother was alive. Victoria sounded surprised but pleased. That sounds lovely, Dad. I'll make sure everyone's there. Everyone. Richard, Daniel, Catherine, the grandchildren. I want the whole family together. Of course. Is there a special occasion? I've been thinking about the future, I said, about what happens to everything I've built. I want to discuss it with all of you. I could hear the excitement in her voice. She thought I was going to announce my retirement. She thought I was going to hand over control of everything willingly. She thought their plan was about to come to fruition. She had no idea what was coming. Saturday arrived. I had the house catered by the same company that used to do Margaret's events. White tablecloths, fine china, expensive wine. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine. I wanted everything to be perfect. I wanted them to remember this night for the rest of their lives. They arrived at 7 o'clock. Victoria and Daniel came first, bearing flowers and a bottle of wine that probably cost $500. Richard and Catherine followed, with the 4 grandchildren in tow, freshly scrubbed and dressed in their Sunday best. The house looks beautiful, Dad, Victoria said, kissing my cheek. It feels empty without your mother, I said, but having you all here helps. We made small talk in the living room. The grandchildren showed me pictures they had drawn at school. Richard poured champagne. Daniel told a long story about a deal he had closed in London. I nodded and smiled and played the role of the doddering old patriarch they expected me to be. At 8 o'clock, we sat down to dinner. Prime rib, roasted vegetables, twice-baked potatoes. All the foods Margaret used to make for special occasions. The caterer had replicated her recipes perfectly. This is wonderful, Dad, Victoria said, cutting into her meat. It's just like Mom used to make. I wanted to honor her memory, I said. She was the heart of this family. Richard raised his glass. To Mom, to Margaret, everyone echoed. We drank. I did not. I've also been thinking about the future, I continued, setting down my glass, about what happens to everything when I'm gone. Victoria leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation. "We've been wanting to talk to you about that, Dad. We have some ideas about restructuring the company, streamlining operations." "I'm sure you do," I interrupted. "But first, I'd like to share something with all of you. Something I discovered recently." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. I placed it on the table next to the crystal salt shaker. "This is my death certificate," I said. "According to the state of California, I died on October 15th of this year. Cardiac arrest, secondary to chronic heart disease." The room went completely silent. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. A log popped in the fireplace. Richard's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. Victoria's face drained of color, leaving only her mother's red hair to provide any warmth. Daniel suddenly became very interested in his plate. "It's interesting, isn't it?" I continued. My voice was conversational, almost pleasant. "I had no idea I was dead. I've been walking around, eating breakfast, reading the newspaper, all while being legally deceased. It's quite a trick, wouldn't you say?" "Dad," Victoria started. "Let me finish." My voice hardened. I had practiced this moment 100 times in my mind, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling. I also discovered that, since my death, a remarkable number of my assets have been transferred to new owners. Properties I've owned for decades suddenly belong to other people. Investment accounts I've built over a lifetime have been liquidated. My company has been restructured, and all of this happened without my knowledge or consent. Richard set down his glass. His hand was shaking. "Dad, I can explain. Can you explain the forged power of attorney?" I pulled out another document. "Can you explain why my signature appears on a document I never signed? Can you explain why a disgraced doctor who lost his medical license was paid to certify my death?" I pulled out more documents. Stack after stack. The marriage certificate to Elena Vasquez. The commitment papers from Cedar Pines. The bank records showing millions of dollars in transfers. The emails between Victoria and Richard discussing their plans. Can you explain why I'm apparently married to a woman I've never met? Can you explain why you had commitment papers drawn up to lock me in a psychiatric facility? Can you explain why you've been systematically stripping me of everything I own?" Catherine gasped. The grandchildren looked confused and frightened. Daniel was staring at Victoria with something that might have been anger or might have been fear. "I loved you," I said. "Both of you. I gave you everything. I built an empire and I handed it to you. And this is how you repay me, by declaring me dead, by stealing my money, by planning to lock me away like a mad old man." "Dad, please." Victoria reached for my hand across the table. I pulled away. "There's something else. Something I learned that hurt more than all of this combined." I paused. "Your mother was part of it. Margaret helped you plan this. She was in on it from the beginning." Victoria's face crumpled. Richard finally looked up from his plate. The grandchildren sensed something terrible was happening and went very quiet. "She changed her mind," Victoria whispered. Tears were running down her cheeks. "At the end, when she got sick, she told us to stop. She said it was wrong, that she couldn't go to her grave knowing what she'd done. But by then, we had already started. The forged documents were already in place. We thought if we just waited, if we were patient, if we did it carefully, you thought you could steal everything and I would never know." "We thought you would be happier," Richard said. His voice was defensive now, almost petulant. "We thought if we took care of everything, you could just relax, enjoy your retirement, travel, play golf. You've worked so hard your whole life, Dad. We were trying to help you." That was only if you found out, Victoria said. It was a backup plan, a precaution. We never wanted to use it. I stood up from the table. My legs were steady. My voice was calm. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm about to say. I have contacted the authorities. The FBI is investigating the fraud. The death certificate has been invalidated. The power of attorney has been declared void. The marriage to Elena Vasquez has been annulled. Every property transfer, every financial transaction you made in my name is being reversed. Richard went pale. You'll destroy us. We'll go to prison. That's not for me to decide. That's for the courts. Victoria was sobbing now, her makeup running down her face. Dad, please, we're your children. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we're family. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I looked at her. My daughter, the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders, the woman I walked down the aisle at her wedding, the mother of my grandchildren. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to steal from me, the moment you decided to lock me away, the moment you chose money over love. I reached into my pocket one more time and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was heavy, cream-colored, embossed with the logo of my law firm. This is a press release. Tomorrow morning, it will be sent to every major news outlet in the country. It announces that I am donating my entire estate to charity. Every property, every investment, every dollar. The Pemberton Foundation for the Arts, the Pemberton Medical Research Fund, the Pemberton Scholarship Program for Underprivileged Youth. Every cent I ever earned will go to people who actually need it. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking. I could hear the wind rustling the trees outside. I could hear my own heart beating, steady and strong, the heart they had tried to stop with a fraudulent death certificate. Victoria looked like she had been slapped. Daniel's face was the color of ash. Catherine had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. And Richard, my son, my firstborn, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and throw a baseball and tie a tie, he looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. Richard shot to his feet, knocking over his wine glass. The red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. You can't do that. That's our inheritance. We've worked for years. You've worked for years to steal it. Now it's going to people who deserve it more than you do. We deserve it, Richard shouted. We're your children. We gave up our lives to work in your company, to build your empire, to make you rich. You gave up nothing. I gave you everything. Every opportunity, every advantage, every dollar you ever spent. And instead of being grateful, instead of being loyal, you decided to take what wasn't yours. It should have been ours, Victoria cried. You were going to leave it to us anyway. We were just accelerating the timeline. By declaring me dead? By forging my signature? By planning to lock me in an asylum? I shook my head. You weren't accelerating anything. You were stealing. You were betraying. And now you're going to face the consequences. I picked up my coat from the back of my chair. The lawyers will be in touch about the criminal investigation. I suggest you hire good attorneys. You're going to need them. I walked toward the door. Victoria ran after me, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Dad, wait. Please. What about the grandchildren? They're innocent in all of this. They love you. They need you. Are you going to punish them for our mistakes? I stopped. I turned. I looked at the 4 children sitting at the table, their little faces confused and scared. Sarah, the oldest, was holding her younger brother's hand. The twins were crying quietly. The grandchildren are the only reason I'm not pressing charges personally, I said. The only reason I'm letting the authorities handle this instead of destroying you myself. I've set up trust funds for each of them, for their education, for their future. Money that you cannot touch, that you cannot steal, that you cannot squander. It will be managed by independent trustees until they reach the age of 25. And us? Richard asked. What happens to us? That's up to the courts and to your consciences if you have any left. I looked at my grandchildren one more time. I wanted to memorize their faces, their innocent eyes, their trusting smiles. Then I looked at my children. Goodbye, Victoria. Goodbye, Richard. I hope someday you understand what you've lost, not the money. The money was never what mattered. You lost your father. You lost his respect. You lost his love. And those are things that no amount of money can ever buy back. I walked out of the house. I got into my car. I drove away into the night, leaving them standing in the doorway, their faces lit by the porch light, their futures in ruins. That was 6 months ago. I'm sitting now on the patio of my home in Carmel by the sea. It's modest by the standards I used to live by. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a little garden where I grow tomatoes and peppers. But it's mine, really mine. Not part of any estate, not tied to any family business, just a simple house for a simple life. The legal proceedings are still ongoing. Victoria was indicted on 12 counts of fraud, forgery, and elder abuse. Richard faces similar charges, plus additional counts of securities, fraud related to the corporate restructuring. Daniel fled to Spain to avoid prosecution, but Interpol is looking for him. Catherine filed for divorce and is cooperating with investigators. Elena Vasquez was arrested in Las Vegas. She cut a deal with prosecutors and testified against everyone. She'll serve 2 years in a minimum security facility. It's more than she deserves and less than she earned. The charitable foundation is thriving. Last month, we funded 6 new art programs in underserved schools. I visited one of them, a middle school in South Central Los Angeles where kids had never held a paintbrush before. I watched a 12-year-old girl create her first watercolor, a painting of her grandmother's house with yellow curtains and a red door. She looked at me with such pride, such joy, and I thought, this is what money is for. Not yachts and sports cars and houses with 20 rooms. This, a child discovering she can create beauty. Next month, we're breaking ground on a research center for Alzheimer's disease, a cause that has become personal to me since my children tried to convince the world I had dementia. The irony isn't lost on me. They said I was losing my mind, so now I'm funding research to help people who actually are. Maybe someday that research will help someone else's father keep his memories, keep his dignity, keep his family. The scholarships have already helped dozens of students afford college, students who remind me of the young man I used to be, hungry and determined and full of dreams. I've met some of them. I've shaken their hands and looked into their eyes and seen the same fire I used to feel burning in my own chest. They're going to change the world, these kids. They're going to build things and discover things and create things that I can't even imagine. That's my legacy now. Not buildings with my name on them, not a corporate empire. Just a foundation that helps people who need it, people who will use their second chances better than my children used their first ones. Sometimes I think about Margaret, about how she was part of it at the beginning. Frank found more evidence after my confrontation with the children. Letters she wrote to Victoria outlining the plan. Emails to Richard discussing logistics. She had been planning this for years, maybe even before she got sick. But he also found something else. A letter she wrote a month before she died. A letter she never sent. My dearest Harold, it said, I have done terrible things, things I cannot undo, things that will haunt me into the next world. I thought I was protecting our children, ensuring their future, but I was only destroying our family. I wanted to tell you the truth before I died, but I was too much of a coward. I couldn't bear to see the look in your eyes when you learned what I had done. If you ever discover this, please know that I loved you. Despite everything, despite my weakness and my failures, I loved you more than anything in this world. I hope someday you can forgive me. Your Margaret. I keep that letter in my desk drawer. I read it sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and I can hear the ocean in the distance. Do I forgive her? I don't know. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. Some days I feel only anger, a burning rage at the woman who shared my bed for 46 years while plotting my destruction. Other days I feel only grief, a bottomless sadness for the love we lost and the trust we broke. And some days, rare days, I feel something like peace. My grandchildren visit me once a month. Victoria and Richard are not allowed to come, court order, but the children come with a social worker, and we spend the day together. We build sand castles on the beach. We eat ice cream at the little shop on the pier. We talk about school and friends and all the small things that matter to children. I don't speak ill of their parents to them. They'll learn the truth eventually when they're old enough to understand. But for now, I want them to have a grandfather who loves them, a grandfather who is present and kind and patient, a grandfather who will not abandon them no matter what their parents have done. Last week, my granddaughter Sarah asked me a question. She's 8 years old, with her grandmother's red hair and her mother's curious eyes. "Grandpa, why don't you see Mommy anymore?" I thought about how to answer. I could have told her the truth. I could have said that her mother tried to steal from me, tried to lock me away, tried to take everything I had ever built. But what good would that do? She's 8 years old. She loves her mother. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, I said, big disagreements that take a long time to work out. But that doesn't change how much I love you. And it doesn't change how much your mother loves you either. Sarah seemed to accept this. She went back to building her sandcastle. But she looked back at me once, and there was something in her eyes that told me she understood more than I gave her credit for. Children always understand more than we think. I'm 70 years old. According to the actuarial tables, I have maybe 15 years left. Maybe 20 if I'm lucky, and the doctors are wrong. I've decided to spend those years doing things that matter, not accumulating more wealth, not building another empire, not chasing the success that consumed my younger years, just living. Simply and honestly and well. I have my garden, I have my books, I have my view of the ocean, the endless blue horizon that reminds me how small we all are in the grand scheme of things. And once a month, I have my grandchildren who remind me that there is still good in this world, still hope for the future, still love that hasn't been corrupted by greed. My children thought they could take everything from me. They thought they could declare me dead and steal my legacy and lock me away forever. But they were wrong. They took my money, but I got it back. They took my reputation, but I rebuilt it. They took my trust, but that was never something they deserved in the first place. What they couldn't take was my dignity, my integrity, my sense of self. Those things are mine. They have always been mine, and they will be mine until the day I actually die, not on some fraudulent certificate, but peacefully in my own bed, on my own terms. Money comes and goes. Properties can be bought and sold. Businesses rise and fall. But trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. And family, which should be the safest harbor in any storm, can sometimes be the source of the greatest betrayal. I don't know if my children will ever truly understand what they did wrong. I don't know if they'll spend their lives regretting it or justifying it. I don't know if the grandchildren will grow up to resent me for what happened to their parents. I received a letter from Victoria last month. She wrote it from the county jail where she's awaiting trial. The handwriting was shaky, nothing like the confident script I remembered from her childhood. "Dear Dad," it began, "I think about what I did every single day. I lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my cell, wondering how I became this person, the daughter who tried to destroy her own father. I tell myself it started with good intentions. I tell myself I was worried about you, about your health, about your future. But we both know that's a lie. It was always about the money. It was always about what I could take from you." She went on for 3 pages. She talked about her childhood, about how she always felt like she was competing with Richard for my attention. She talked about her marriage to Daniel, about how he had encouraged her greed, amplified her worst impulses. She talked about the night she first suggested the plan to Margaret, sitting in our kitchen while I was away on business, whispering about powers of attorney and death certificates like they were planning a surprise party. "Mom was reluctant at first," Victoria wrote. "She said you didn't deserve it, that you had worked too hard for too long. But I convinced her. I told her it was for the grandchildren's future. I told her you would never know, that you would live out your days in comfort while we took care of everything. I made it sound so reasonable, so logical, so right. But it wasn't right, Dad. It was the most wrong thing I've ever done in my life." I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with Margaret's unsent confession. I haven't written back. I don't know what I would say. Richard's letter came a week later. His was shorter, more businesslike. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just asked me to consider dropping the charges, to think about what a trial would do to the family name, to the grandchildren, to his own children who were growing up without their father. "You've already won, Dad," he wrote. "You've taken everything, the money, the company, our freedom. What more do you want? Is watching us suffer really worth it? Is that the legacy you want to leave?" I threw his letter in the trash. Some days I wonder if I was too harsh. If there was a path that didn't involve federal prosecutors and prison sentences and ruined lives, maybe I could have just walked away, taken my money, and started over somewhere else. Maybe I could have forgiven them the way Margaret wanted to be forgiven. But then I remember the commitment papers. I remember the falsified medical evaluations. I remember sitting in that coffee shop while Frank told me I had been declared dead, and I know that I did the only thing I could do. I fought back. I defended myself. I refused to be a victim, and I gave my fortune to people who will use it for good, rather than people who would have squandered it on their own greed. Is that justice or revenge? After all these months, I still don't know. Maybe it's both. Maybe there's no real difference when the stakes are this high. What I do know is this: I made the right choice, not the easy choice, not the comfortable choice, but the right one. I chose to stand up for myself. I chose to protect what I had built. I chose to give my legacy to people who would use it to make the world better, rather than to people who would squander it on greed and luxury. And I chose to face my children with the truth, even when it would have been easier to run away. I wanted them to see my face when they realized their scheme had failed. I wanted them to understand that their father, the man they thought was too old and too weak to fight back, still had fire in him. Some people might call that revenge. I call it justice. I sit on my patio with a cup of tea, watching the day end, thinking about all the days that have come before and all the days that might still come. Tomorrow, I will wake up early. I will tend my garden, pulling weeds and checking on my tomatoes. I will read my newspaper and do my crossword puzzle, the same ritual I followed for 50 years. I will call my friend William and maybe play a game of chess, the way we used to when we were young men with our whole lives ahead of us. In the afternoon, I might walk down to the beach. I'll take off my shoes and feel the sand between my toes, cold and wet from the morning tide. I'll watch the waves roll in and think about all the years I spent in boardrooms and conference calls, chasing deals and building empires, while this simple pleasure was here waiting for me the whole time. I used to think success meant having more money, more properties, more power. But now I understand that success means needing less. It means being content with what you have. It means finding joy in the small things, the garden and the books and the grandchildren who visit once a month. It's a small life, a quiet life, but it's mine. And after everything I've been through, that's all I want. My name is Harold Pemberton. I'm 70 years old. I was betrayed by the people I loved most, by my own children and my own wife. I was declared dead by fraudulent documents. I was robbed of millions of dollars and nearly locked away in a psychiatric facility for the rest of my life. But I survived. I fought back. I won. And now I'm living proof that it's never too late to reclaim your life, your dignity, and your future. Take care of yourselves, all of you. Value the people who value you. And never, ever let anyone, not even your own blood, take away what is rightfully yours. This is my story, and I'm glad I got to share it with you. If you're going through something similar, if you feel like the people you love are taking advantage of you, if you suspect that someone is trying to steal what you've worked so hard to build, I want you to know this: it's not your fault. You didn't fail as a parent or as a person. Some people, no matter how much you give them, will always want more. Some people will look at your love and see only an opportunity to exploit. That's their failure, not yours. Don't be afraid to fight back. Don't be afraid to stand up for yourself. Don't let anyone, not even your own blood, convince you that you don't deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. You do. You always have, and you always will, from Carmel by the sea, with a heart finally at peace. If this hit close to home, subscribe and share it with someone who needs the reminder. Your dignity is not negotiable, especially with family.